My iPad seems to have turned the video I just filmed into a still image, so in case it doesn't give my video back, we're doing this again. I am so happy right now. Hey, it's Starzy, and today we are talking about all the books that I read in January. For once, I have most of the books to hold up physically, so I'll just go through the few things that does not apply to first. If it seems like I'm rushing through this, it's because I've had to do it a second time. We'll see how we go. The first thing I listened to in January was Highly Suspicious and Unfairly Cute by Talia Hibbert. I was able to listen to this because I had access to an ALC through Libro FM, because I'm part of like the educator program there. This is the only reason I really picked this up, because I usually do kind of avoid YA, contemporary and romance, which is what this is. This follows kind of like two rivals who used to be friends, and then, you know, things progress in a different way when they both end up on this like camp for a potential scholarship, I think it was. As I said, the type of thing I usually don't gravitate towards, and as expected, I felt like this was just fine. It was completely just fine to me. If you do really like YA contemporary, this is probably something you will like much more than I did. I didn't necessarily have any major problems with it. It was cute enough, just not my favorite thing personally, and I've never thought about it again since I listened to it. So cute enough thing to start the year with, but it was just fine. I also listened to The Stolen Heir by Holly Black. This is like the spin-off from the Cruel Prince series, her Fae fantasy YA series. So this is following like the brother of the main character from that series and another girl. They are, you know, obviously older now, and there's stuff going on. This was another thing I felt just fine about. Don't worry, there are things in the month that I loved. The two things I listened to just happened to be the things I felt just fine about. It's just how it worked out. Again, no real issues with it. It just didn't really grab my attention, I guess, which I felt kind of similarly about The Cruel Prince, to be honest, as well. I didn't become more invested until like the end of that series. It is what it is. I then read a Dungeons & Dragons Ravenloft, Orphan of Agony Isle, which is a comic book. I had an arc of this through NatGalley. Ravenloft is like the horror setting of D&D, which isn't a setting I've personally ever explored, but this definitely does make me want to explore it more. I really like weird horror stuff. This had some cool art in it, so I did really enjoy this, although the arc itself, the digital arc itself, wouldn't open properly on my computer. The bottom of all the pages was cut off, so that was not ideal, but from what I could read, I enjoyed this and what was going on, and there were kind of multiple little stories throughout it in different ways. There was like a girl who was being fixed up by like a doctor, and then there was other weird stuff going on with that, and I enjoyed this and I want to explore this horror setting more now. Then we get to all the physical things that I read in the month, starting with, of course, the book that I took on my road trip, which you might have seen, and that was The Love Hypothesis by Hazelsood. Yeah, I didn't love this. Sorry, Kelly, because you're the one who kept recommending it to me, but I didn't hate the experience overall. But this is an adult romance, and the whole concept is a little bit convoluted in itself, because our main character has a best friend who's really into a guy, but her best friend won't date this guy because she used to, like, she dated him first, basically, and so she wants to convince her best friend that it's okay to date him. So when her best friend's coming, she like kisses the first guy she sees to like convince her that she's seeing someone else. Which fine, like I like fake dating sometimes, but I didn't love the way it was done in this. And that was partly because of the way her best friend was almost like micromanaging her relationship and what she should or should not be doing. And some of the stuff she was like pushing her to do, and it was like, even if they are genuinely in a relationship, it's very new, and maybe you shouldn't be telling your friend what she should or should not be doing. Like, let her have her own autonomy and consent to what is being done. Like, that whole thing was not good. And another thing that really annoyed me was the emphasis on how big this guy is. Like, I know it's started as like a Raylo fanfic, which isn't a couple I like to begin with, and it's meant to be like Adam Driver, which also, you know, not necessarily my type, but that's fine. I get it. He's tall. He's big. You could have mentioned it once or twice. I didn't need to hear it as many times it was mentioned in this book, especially when it came to like the intimate scene and something there that just didn't even really make sense. Yeah, as I said though, I didn't hate the experience overall. It was an easy enough read. There were some cute moments. It's just that each of those cute moments was kind of balanced out with something happening again that annoyed me. So, like, it was okay overall because there were some nice cute things and it was easy read, but there were just a lot of things that annoyed me as well. So, that's just a little bit about my feelings on this book. Cool. While I was away, I also bought a manga. I bought the first volume of Hat Atelier and I loved this. I gave it 5 stars. It's really cute. It's possibly one of my favorite art styles I've ever seen in a manga. It's just real pretty. And it's just a really cute story too, because we're following this girl who's always wanted to be a witch. They're like the spellcasters of this world. There's an interesting magic going on. I liked like the reveal of how magic actually works in this world. And there's also some like not necessarily real happy things that happen to then escalate to her actually having to train to become a witch. So I'm definitely going to keep reading this. I loved this. And I want to read more manga this year if you have recommendations, because this one was real cute. Another manga I read, this one I picked up from the library, it's Midnight Secretary, which is kind of like a vampire romance situation. I've always really liked vampire-y stuff like this since I was a young teen, so I don't necessarily think this is like the best thing I've ever read or anything, but I still gave it 4 stars just for like the enjoyment, even though I really don't like one of the characters, because the whole thing is this woman becomes a secretary for this guy and he's not a nice guy at all, and he's like a womanizer, presumably, amongst other things. Doesn't treat people very nicely, but then she also finds out that he's a vampire and is now his secretary, having to look after him in that context. And at the end of this, there's also hints of like maybe a romantic tension between the two of them as well. As I said, I really didn't like him, but like, I'm just a sucker for this kind of vampire stuff, no pun intended. Also from the library, I picked up Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy. These two are like my OTP. I will eat up all the media that puts these two together, so I really enjoyed this just because of seeing Harley and Ivy together and, you know, the mayhem that ensued, all the things they had to deal with. We've got Ivy, I think, having like died but kind of come back in this more like plant form, and so they're trying to deal with that, and then there's some other stuff going on, and I really enjoyed the ride. My first instinct at finishing this was like, I enjoyed this so much, getting to see them together, like 5 stars. I think I pulled it back to 4 stars because on reflection there are some things that are like the fact that maybe they're not explicitly romantic in this, so maybe that's kind of taking them backwards since they are canon now, and also maybe the portrayal of Ivy at the end and her characterization wasn't fantastic, but I just really enjoyed the ride and I love seeing these two together. And we also have just like cute art, like look at her. I then read Malice by Heather Walter. This is our first Slaughter Squad book club read, which is just Vanessa, Ali and I. It's not like a public open book club, it's just the 3 of us reading books together, or like Vanessa speedily reading books while I try to catch up, and then Ali 2 weeks later reads the book. Seems to be the pattern that's happened this month. We'll see how that goes the rest of the year. But this is kind of a take on the Evil Fairy and Sleeping Beauty, so from like the Evil Fairy's perspective, and I like love fairy tale stuff. I will say the beginning of this book I wasn't loving. It was very like info dumpy, and it was just like telling you a lot and not showing you a lot, and I really wasn't enjoying it to begin with, but it did pick up and I did enjoy the latter half. Lots of stuff went down at the end. In saying that, it was also very predictable, but I kind of find that with anything that's like based on fairy tales, that can be somewhat the case anyway, and I often pick up on plot points anyway, so like, even though everything was predictable, like that didn't necessarily bother me, and I enjoyed it enough where I think I gave it 4 stars. If, you know, Goodreads had half ratings, maybe I would have given it 3.5. Like, the end was enough that I was enjoying the ride, and I rate primarily on enjoyment. So even though it was a really slow start, I enjoyed some of the stuff that was going on, and we've also got like sapphic stuff going on, which I'm also always on board with. And there's also a sequel, and after the events that went down at the end of this book, I am definitely interested in picking up that sequel and seeing how things are gonna go from where this left off. Again, not like a groundbreaking read, but enjoyable enough by the end of it that, you know, it was a fun ride, even though I didn't like it to begin with. And then the very last book that I read in January was another 5-star read. So I had 2 5 stars in January, 2 things I really loved, and it is The Atlas 6 by Olivie Blake, which is another book that Vanessa and I read, and we'll see whether Ali catches up to us or whether that is too much for her to handle. We love you, Ali. Whatever you can read and talk about with us is fine. And look, I'm wearing Ali's merch because it's real comfy. But this just has a lot of elements that are things like I specifically like, because in this we're following a group of characters who are selected to kind of go and train at what exists of the Alexandrian library these days in this world, and each of them have different magical powers, and that's something I particularly like, having a group where they all have like unique powers. That's always something I find really interesting. This also has like that academic setting, so that like dark academia kind of vibes is something I also really enjoy. And I also just really enjoyed like the character interactions and the tension. Some of the tension between these characters was just so good, and there was one scene in particular that as soon as like they walked into that room, I suspected what was going to happen, and it did happen, and I was not disappointed. So I just really enjoyed this. It had a lot of elements that are exactly my thing, and I just enjoyed the ride, and I enjoyed all of that tension between the characters. I'm currently reading the sequel, and I'm not enjoying it as much, and I think part of that is because one of my favorite characters, at least in terms of one of my favorite characters in terms of their interaction with other people, has been kind of removed from the story, and so without all of those tensions between those multiple characters, it's falling a little flat for me, and there's also just like not as much happening. I'm hoping that book will pick up, but regardless, this first one, I loved it. It was just exactly my kind of thing. It is a book full of pretentious hot people, but that just is apparently something that I can like in my books, so it'd be what it be. And that's it. That is everything that I read in January. Let me know if you have read any of these and what you thought of them, or let me know what your favorite read in January was. I've gone through this very quickly because I'm just angry at the fact I had to do it again at all, so hopefully you still got enough of my thoughts on each of these books. But otherwise, I will see you next time. TTFN and starzyarts.